Donald Trump recently took to Truth Social to nervously rant about a trial in Colorado, arguably one of the most important in the history of the United States, because a group of voters is suing to strike his name from the ballot, arguing that Trump is constitutionally ineligible to hold public office. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, so this is the latest development in an ongoing story that we've discussed on this channel about Trump's potential ineligibility to hold public office, to become president again, because he may very well have violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which prevents insurrectionists or those who give aid and comfort to insurrectionists from ever again holding public office. Now, in my opinion, he absolutely violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and in the opinion of many legal scholars and attorneys and constitutional scholars, including many conservative scholars and constitutional scholars, but I digress. Now, there are many trials, many lawsuits that are going to litigate this issue in a variety of states, but the very first one has actually begun. It began earlier this week in Colorado. But before we dive into what has happened this week, I want you to hear straight from Donald Trump in response to this trial, because he went on Truth Central to complain about it.
A fake trial is currently taking place to try and illegally remove my name from the ballot. I often say that 2024 will be the most important election in the history of our country. The reason for that and that statement is that our country is being destroyed by people who have no idea what they're doing, or even worse, they may very well have an idea. They may hate our country, and they may want to see it destroyed. But it may also be the last election we ever have. If this election doesn't work, if this election is rigged and stolen, if bad things happen, our country will not survive. If Crooked Joe and the Democrats get away with removing my name from the ballot, then there will never be a free election in America again. We will have become a dictatorship where your president is chosen for you. You will no longer have a vote, or certainly won't have a meaningful vote. And you could say, frankly, that that has already begun. This truly is our final chance to save America, and with the 2024 election now less than 1 year away, this is your chance to take a stand against tyrants that support the one and only movement that can save our country and make America great again. We must win in 2024. If we don't win, we will not have a country. If we do win, we will make America greater than it's ever been before.
First off, did you all notice that Freudian slip where he said, "This is your last chance to take a stand against the tyrants that support the Make America Great Again movement"? It was a Freudian slip. He actually called himself and his supporters tyrants, which is hilarious. Now, there are many things to address there, but the biggest one is the idea that it's Crooked Joe Biden and the Democratic Party that are trying to make this case. Now, Democratic voters would be well within their right to, file these lawsuits. But what's funny is that's actually not what's going on in Colorado, and I'll allow the Secretary of State of Colorado to clarify the issue.
What are your concerns about the possibility that this could be seen as political?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, I'm a Democratic Secretary of State, and I did not bring this case. I'm actually a party as a defendant because I certify the ballot. And I would just say, look, Colorado Republican and unaffiliated voters brought this case. I think it is very reasonable to determine whether the U.S. Constitution is in play. We should, as a nation, follow rule of law. We should be following what the Constitution says, what state laws say. And if there's something unclear, it's an appropriate mechanism to file a lawsuit. What is inappropriate is trying to steal an election from the American people, inciting an insurrection, having a scheme of fake electors, having conversations about stealing or seizing voting equipment. Those things are unreasonable. A court case like we're seeing play out here, I think is just fine.
So yeah, that's Secretary of State Jena Griswold making the case that, listen, she's actually one of the parties being sued because she's the one who has to certify the votes in Colorado. She's not the one bringing the lawsuit. And it's actually a group of Republican or unaffiliated voters, because it's multiple voters, not Democratic voters, although Democratic voters would well be within their right to do so as well. And then she points out correctly that actually Donald Trump and the Republican Party and the MAGA movement, they were the ones who engaged in inappropriate and unconstitutional means to try to steal the 2020 election from President Biden. So just very well said, Madam Secretary. Now, I want to play a clip involving two constitutional scholars. You have Jamie Raskin, who's a Democratic congressman, and then you have Lawrence Tribe, who's a Harvard professor and probably the most esteemed constitutional scholar in the country. And they further elaborate on what's going on with this lawsuit.
Just give us your evaluation of the merits of this case. It was brought by 4 registered Republicans and 2 unaffiliated Colorado voters, and they have until March 5th to decide. That's when the primary is in Colorado. I will make deference to the congressman and go to you first, sir. You know the facts better than any of us who are sitting here about what Donald Trump did on January 6th. Is this case meritorious in your view?
Well, I should yield to my constitutional law professor, Larry Tribe, who taught me everything I know about the Constitution. But let me give you my sense of it, Joy. I don't really understand people who control access to the ballot saying, well, we'll let the voters decide. I mean, if someone showed up trying to run for president at 19 years old, their answer wouldn't be, well, let's let the voters decide. They would say, let's consult the Constitution, which says you got to be 35 years old in order to run for president. If Jennifer Granholm, the Secretary of Energy, showed up, or Arnold Schwarzenegger, both of whom were born abroad, and they try to run for president, I don't think anybody would say, well, let's just let the voters decide. They'd say that violates the rules of the Constitution, which says you have to be a natural-born U.S. citizen. And it's the same thing here. The question, the hard question, is not should the courts end up deciding, because the courts will have to decide this because it is a constitutional question. The hard part is, did he engage in insurrection or rebellion? That is the hard part for some people. Is incitement to insurrection participating in insurrection? The House of Representatives already impeached him for inciting insurrection. 57 of 100 senators voted to determine that he did engage in incitement to insurrection. So you've got robust bipartisan bicameral majorities defining that as a legislative fact. But I think the alternative argument will be, no, you need somehow a criminal conviction first. It's not enough to show that it happened. And, against that, I would simply say the language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says that you can't run for office if you've sworn an oath to the Constitution, but then you've participated in insurrection or rebellion. It doesn't say if you've been convicted of insurrection or rebellion. But I think that will become really the heart of the legal argument.
Yeah, so very well said. Again, and we've discussed this in previous videos, and I don't want to relitigate the entire thing here, but the language of the 14th Amendment doesn't require a conviction. Now, it's entirely possible that once this case makes its way to the Supreme Court, which it almost certainly will, as reticent as the Supreme Court would probably be to hear the case, I can't imagine a scenario where it's not appealed to them and they're not basically compelled to answer it. They may decide, they may read in invisible ink that a conviction is required, but the plain reading of the text doesn't require it. As a matter of fact, and the 14th Amendment was passed in, I think it was 1868, so 3 years after the end of the Civil War. And even though the language doesn't confine itself to the Civil War, it was created with Confederates in mind, right? And most of the people it applied to were not convicted of insurrection at all. They understood that the disqualification applied to them in much the same way that you don't have to be convicted of being 19 years old. It's simply a fact question. You're either, in the example that Jamie Raskin pointed out, because you have to be 35 to be eligible to be the president. Well, if you're not 35, you don't have to be convicted of being something that you're not. There doesn't have to be a lawsuit involved to determine whether or not you are 19 or you're a natural-born citizen. The person responsible for putting names on the ballot would simply make a fact-based determination. Well, it says you need to be 35, you're not 35, or it says you need to be a natural-born citizen, you're not a natural-born citizen. So there is no real need for a conviction here. And again, some of the arguments that people have offered online or, in Trump's defense, I suppose, are that, listen, he wasn't on the ground on January 6th. He wasn't, he didn't have a pitchfork or a torch or a billy club. He wasn't wearing the QAnon shaman hat or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is, you could easily make the argument that he incited that insurrection. But moreover, even if you don't want to consider Donald Trump an insurrectionist, which I think the argument pretty compellingly supports that he is, part of the disqualification language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment talks about giving aid or comfort to those who have engaged in insurrection. And Donald Trump unquestionably did that when he sat on his orange ass for more than 3 hours and watched the insurrection unfold at the Capitol building, and he didn't do anything. He didn't call on his supporters to stop. He didn't, call in the National Guard or deploy law enforcement. He was the sitting chief executive, the most powerful man in the world. He had an affirmative duty constitutionally to quell that insurrection, as all presidents do with insurrections, and he chose not to do it. So no matter how you slice it, it seems pretty obvious to me that he is disqualified under the 14th Amendment, but we'll see how the case plays out. Now, with that in mind, we'll skim through some of the highlights as pointed out on CNN. Trump betrayed his oath, according to the challengers. Our Constitution prevents people who betrayed their solemn oath, as Trump did here, from serving in office again. Colorado law gives these voters the right to make sure their votes will count by coming to this court and ensuring that only eligible candidates appear on our ballots. That's the basis for their lawsuit. No person, not even the former president, is above the law, said the attorney Eric Olson. Then they played, in the first day, a montage of January 6th footage. Obviously, Trump's attorneys blasted the lawsuit as fringe. He said that there's no concrete definition of insurrection. Therefore, you can't really make rulings based on it, let alone something like this. And the second day, Donald Trump's attorneys attempted to downplay the language that Trump used. They said, listen, okay, so he used incendiary rhetoric, but Democrats in the past have used incendiary rhetoric like fight and, take back and things like that. So what's so different about Trump's rhetoric? Well, none of the rhetoric that Democrats use precipitated an insurrection, so I would think that that's a major bit of difference here. 14th Amendment scholars who have testified said that they think that Trump, is certainly disqualified under the 14th Amendment, that he, is disqualified because of what the framers of the 14th Amendment, again, in the aftermath of the Civil War, intended to do. It was written with Confederates in mind, but it wasn't applicable to just Confederates, just people who donned the uniform of a secessionist nation. It was meant to apply to anybody in perpetuity in any century who took an oath to defend the Constitution and betrayed it. And then on day 3, again, they had additional 14th Amendment experts who said the same thing. He said the Gerard Magliocha said that the 14th Amendment was meant to apply expansively, including against presidents, and has been enforced by state courts, which is true. There was a state representative, a state county commissioner in 2022 who was removed from office. He was yanked out of his position by a judge because he participated in the January 6th insurrection, and that judge decided that he violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and so he was removed from office. So if it can apply to a county commissioner, why on earth could it not apply to a president as well? So again, the trial is ongoing. It's the first of many. You have others coming in like Michigan and Minnesota. This is the first of many. It will almost certainly make its way before the Supreme Court. Again, as far as I'm concerned, it's relatively simple, and I understand that a lot of people are saying, well, listen, doesn't this open the door to potential abuse? Of course it does. Does it open the door to widespread backlash? Will Republican voters around the country be furious if this case is decided in such a way so that Donald Trump is no longer eligible for office, that he's not allowed to have his name on the ballot? Of course they'll be furious, but then the question becomes, what's the alternative? If the facts show that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection or gave aid and comfort to insurrectionists, which again I think is patently inarguable, it's absolutely the case. If it is the case, if the courts agree that it's the case, and that means he violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, what's the alternative? Just let him get away with it? Then we will have effectively made Donald Trump above the law, not just above the law, not above city law, city ordinances, state law, or federal statutory law, we will have elevated Donald Trump above the Constitution, which he clearly thinks he is already, right? We can't reaffirm that insane belief. Donald Trump has no limiting principle. We have no reason to believe that if we just give him a mulligan on this, that he wouldn't possibly do it again. So to me, it's a relatively simple, even though I know the stakes are high. Let me know what you think in the comments.